Okay. Mariah, how long have you lived in Salem?
My fiance and I moved here last year.
Ooh, so fresh.
Relatively
Oh,
fresh.
tell
Yeah,
tell me about it. How'd you
absolutely.
end up here?
Well, oh goodness. I grew up just a little bit down 128. I grew up in Lexington.
Okay.
And I was a classic example of a kid that for Salem, it was coming to the Willows or,
Yeah.
the eighth grade field trip
Yep.
and then about 2 years ago, when my fiance and I got engaged, we were wedding venue hunting. We were looking around and we weren't living here. We were living in DC. I was doing postdoctoral fellowship work there. And we toured venues, honestly, all over the place.
Yeah.
And we fell in love with one here on the North Shore. And of course, when you're having a wedding, you need to put people somewhere. And
Yeah.
so Salem became kind of a natural home for where we were planning on having our guests stay. And so over the last couple of years, we've been here a lot.
Right. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so within all of that, it went from me being like, I don't know, Salem, Halloween town, basically, right?
Yeah.
To, oh, Salem's amazing. We
Yeah.
really love Salem. And
Yeah.
so when we wanted to make sure that we had moved back home before the wedding and that we weren't doing kind of all of the different pieces of that remotely. But also my parents are getting older, all these different aspects. And I was working in federal government, and obviously the current administration coming in turned everything upside down,
Yeah.
and all of the work that I was doing got slammed to a halt.
Yeah.
And so during the government shutdown last year, we kind of looked at each other and we went, it's time.
Yeah.
I was trying to give myself a year at my last job, and I was like, it's dead in the water. Let's go. So we took the leap, and we were on the ground within a couple of weeks, and we were really lucked out. We found an incredible apartment, and our neighbors are amazing. It's really just been like falling into a community that was always meant to be ours, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it's a really beautiful thing. We love being here.
What was the perspective? What was the perspective having been the tourist
Yeah.
and come here, like you said, like eighth grade field
Yeah.
trips, being on the receiving end of the tourist crush? Like, did you kind of know what to expect?
Yeah, to some degree.
Yeah.
Like, I also think so. My birthday is October 30th. And
No way. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I kind of have always been like, Halloween's in my blood.
Yeah.
It's been one of my favorite holidays for a very long time.
Sure.
When I come from a complicated family background, and I didn't meet my little half sister till she was 10. And the very first thing that we did was I had her over for my birthday, and we watched Nightmare Before Christmas. Like that, it's just, there's this piece of Halloween culture that is in my bones. And so while, I'm probably not the person that is going to look the most Halloween-y walking around Salem, it is a pretty natural fit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of which, when people do see you walking around Salem, how do they know you? How do they recognize you? What do they know you from?
Yeah.
Because you are kind of new, so it's
I
like,
am, yeah. And it's a funny thing because, the other piece that I will mention along that line is like and I actually didn't remember this till the other day. My very first job in college was working for a bakery down in the Reading train depot, a family-owned bakery called Swiss Bakers. And I actually used to come here all through college, working the farmers markets in the summers. So there's a very real chance that if somebody recognizes my face, it's because I sold them bread.
You're the bread girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that was many years ago. I also have friends that live in the area and in Beverly that I've literally had as some of my closest friends, like bridesmaids in my weddings. Weddings, plural, the one that's upcoming. So one of my best friends that's a bridesmaid in my wedding this fall lives right across the bridge in Beverly and is raising her kid there. And so, if she were to run into me in town, that's where she knows me from.
Yeah.
And then there's plenty of people that know me because I'm running for Congress. And that is a big and kind of wild thing to do in many ways, but it's also an incredible opportunity to meet all of the people that are doing incredible policy work here in Salem and in the surrounding communities. So,
do you get any kind of, because I know like Congressional, it's District 6, it's bigger than Salem, but that, Seth's office is right there.
Yeah, you could throw a rock and hit
it's over your shoulder. Yeah. So it's always seemed very localized. Like, his parents are an IT client of mine. So
really?
Yeah. So it's it is very isolated to kind of Salem Marblehead.
Yeah.
Even though the 6th district is much bigger. Do you get
absolutely.
any kind of pushback, feedback? You're not from here. Like you're not a Salem local. Even
Absolutely.
Though you're
I think
running for that position.
I don't get a ton of feedback from folks that are here because I think the reality of Salem especially with the kind of renaissance it's had in the past 10 years, is that a lot of folks, this is a very melting pot community for a lot of folks. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think it's part of what helps me feel so at home here in a lot of ways. But also the reality of it is like the district starts at Bedford, Burlington, which borders
Yeah.
my hometowns on two sides.
Yep.
So in terms of the district, like you don't grow up knowing where your congressional district lines are. You grow up knowing what your community is. And
Yeah.
so, when people talk about, oh, this mall, that mall, I'm like, yeah, the Burlington Mall is my home mall, right?
Yeah.
It's my pediatrician's in Burlington, like all these different pieces of what makes a community your community. I've been going to the same doctor's office my whole life. It's in the district.
Yeah.
So there is a piece of that of, people I think understandably are, tribal in one way or another. They kind of have the boundaries that they set in their own mind around what their community is. But to me, when Josh and I adopted our dog 2 years ago, August of 24, the very first trip we took him on was to Good Harbor Beach in Gloucester.
Yeah.
And so there is just this piece of, it's other people don't get to define what my community is.
100%.
And, this is very much home for me in every way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned a dog. You adopted a dog. We
Yeah.
also adopted a dog in the last couple of years.
What kind of pup?
He is very cute.
Yes.
He looks like every dog and orphan in a Disney movie
Yes.
would end up
Yeah.
with.
So like scraggly.
Gray, scruffy. His demeanor does not match his looks. He's kind of a jerk.
Mhm.
He's very protective of his people and his house.
I'm imagining Tramp from Lady and the Tramp.
I'll show you a picture when we're done. It's 100% that. But the reason, you guys adopted a dog as well.
Yes.
Are you a practicing veterinarian?
Yeah. I'm currently campaigning full time, but I'm still licensed. I actually just yesterday morning was taking an online exam to put my New Hampshire licensure back in place. So I'm definitely still in touch with a bunch of the hospitals that I've worked for, and if they needed me in a pinch, I could go in, work an overnight shift or swing shift. It's just campaigning is a full time job, so
Sure.
I'm focusing all of my energies on that right now. But within all of that, I am very much still, giving family and friends all the advice that they always ask
Well, yeah,
for.
so there's that. So I do IT for a living, mostly Apple products. So when I tell people that, they're like, well, my iPhone's doing this thing.
Yes.
So when you're
of
at
course.
a party and somebody's like, I'm a veterinarian, they're like, well, my cat's doing this thing.
Oh,
Is
of course.
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also can't help myself. Like it is. I do think there are veterinarians that I talk to that say when I get on an airplane and somebody asks what I do, I tell them I'm a vacuum salesman, because then they ask no
They're gonna be
follow-up
6
questions.
hours of asking questions about the dog, right?
Exactly. But I think part of the beauty of being a veterinarian, there's a couple different pieces. One is that I would say 20% of the job is actually medicine. And 30% of the job is financial planning, because unlike human medicine where you provide care and the doctors don't really know what things cost, in veterinary medicine, it's currently in its current form, it's payment up front.
Yeah.
And so as a doctor, you have to know what to kind of work with people on to help suit their needs and their goals. And then the next step is the other 50%, which is often being more of a counselor in many ways,
100%.
right? And human doctors talk about this too, right? People come in and they're here for something on their elbow. And what it really is they're talking about the fact that their husband just died, or, that they're feeling isolated, right? There's all these social components of health that are so important.
Yeah.
And for people with their animals, that's incredibly important too, because whether it's a person that's struggling with homelessness and their pet is their only tie to a sense of home and comfort, or whether it's people that they're raising their 12-year-old dog that's also that's coming to the end of its life, but it's also their 12-year-old kid's best friend, right? There's all these different pieces of how pets are part of our families and part of in many ways, what makes us human.
Yeah.
And so helping people not just through I've spent most of my career as an emergency veterinarian. So there's the crises that they're in those very acute moments of things that we can treat.
Yeah.
But there's also the reality that a lot of people come into the emergency vet because they haven't wanted to, or they haven't been ready to make the choice about euthanasia.
Yeah.
And now it's time.
Yeah.
And so part of what's actually very difficult about emergency medicine is, a lot of the cases that you see are are simple ear infections or diarrhea, things that you're like, well, you could
Sure.
have gone to your primary care.
Yeah.
But also a lot of it is end of life care
Yeah.
and helping families come to terms with dignity in death.
Yeah.
And so it can be a very heavy job a lot of the time. And um, going through the world, I mean, I was talking to somebody just yesterday that we were talking about this or that, and then all of a sudden they're sharing the story with me about how their cat died 6 years ago,
Yeah.
right? And so that,
I'm fighting the urge to share the story about my cat dying
well,
a year ago.
but
So
but you can, right? And like
yeah.
to me, that's part of the job is holding space for the families that
Yeah.
truly we're all walking around with open wounds, right? We are all carrying the grief of the people that we've lost and the pets that we've lost
Yeah.
because it is love and connection
Yeah.
that leads to grief. And that's, part of why I became a veterinarian is because I personally had obviously my own connection with my own pets and animals growing up. And
Yeah.
certainly I have those connections now with my dog and my 2 cats.
Yeah. Yeah. The one of the things I learned, I work at the Apple store briefly, transitioning careers. And I learned in their hiring process that I eventually ended up doing the hiring process was
Yeah.
we weren't looking for people with technical knowledge. We were looking for people who could communicate on a one-to-one basis. Because like you were
Yes.
saying, somebody comes in, their phone went in the toilet, it's fried,
Yeah.
and all of their pictures are on there and all of their
Yep.
memories and the voicemail from their dead grandmother. And it's not about the device, and it's the people that saw the
Yes.
device and they were like, well, let me fix the phone for you. Like, no, dude, it's the
Yeah.
voicemail from the grandmother that's the important part,
Yeah,
right? So it's kind of the
absolutely.
same thing. And
100%.
then my ultimate point about asking you about being a vet and then what you're doing now, campaigning for Congress, when I was thinking about it leading up to this, that is an insane transition from vet to Congress. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, no, they're pretty analogous
Yeah.
because you are trying to provide a service for the voiceless.
Yes.
You are trying to help a community that can't really communicate what it is that is wrong or that they're feeling. And you're like almost like the liaison
Yeah.
between the cat that doesn't feel good and the owner who doesn't know what the hell's going on.
100%.
Right?
Yes.
So I'm like, so maybe there should be more vets in federal government. But could you give me kind of like the capsule version of how you went from I go to vet school and I treat animals to
Yes.
working in DC to now running for Congress
Yes.
in the city you just moved to?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What I will also say just before we pivot away from that is you absolutely hit the nail on the head because that's something that I don't talk about enough, I think, on the campaign trail, but I feel a lot because it's obviously, even as the candidate, sometimes you find yourself being like, why am I doing this? This is crazy.
Yeah.
And reminding yourself like, yes, the mission is to be a voice for the voiceless,
Yeah.
right? That the role of being a representative isn't about going in with your own ego and, telling a community what they need. Your job is to go in and listen to a community
Yeah.
and be able to bring your skills to bear, all the education that you have, every tool in your toolbox to be able to bring the needs of that community into this big machine that is the federal government.
Well, it seems like, and sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's
but
totally okay.
And maybe we can just skip the transition thing because it's a lot.
Oh, no, it's okay. I want to tell you the story anyway,
Yeah,
but we can get there. We've got time.
It seems like you're going from a thanked job to a thankless job. It seems like it almost seems like self-abuse where you're just like, let me go and just like, because when you're a vet, you probably hear mostly nice stuff. I mean,
50-50.
yeah.
50-50, I will say. 50-50.
Where
Yeah.
I would imagine as a public servant, I mean, 'cause my boss was a city councilor for a long time, and it just seemed like endless abuse. And it's like, dude, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
It does not seem worth the hassle.
I think that's true for a lot of people, and I think that's part of why our government is so broken.
Yeah.
I think the reality is that when you only leave, and this was a realization I had probably a decade ago, if you leave the levers of government or these roles only to the people that are going into them because they'll get something out of them, because it is a rung on their ladder, or because it's what they've spent their entire life being like, this is what I'm going to do as my career, then that's how we end up in the system that we're in.
Yeah.
Right? Where you have career politicians that they've only ever gone to work in a suit, and they are really out of touch with the actual needs of working families.
Yeah.
And as a veterinarian, I worked as a veterinarian all through my time in DC. I worked nights and weekends, picking up shifts, not just to help pay my rent, but because when you go into work in government, you are immediately working in budgets of millions, if not billions, which are numbers which like studies show our brains can't comprehend. Like
Yeah.
$1 million, we can kind of understand.
Sure.
Once you get into billions and trillions, it is like beyond the scope.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to lose touch with what those numbers mean. And then I go into the clinic and I work with a family that, their dog has been vomiting and I'm recommending x-rays and blood work and plus the ER exam. Now we're talking about over $1,000 and more than 50% of Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency.
Yeah.
And so being in those moments with those families where they are there asking you for help, they know that they need your help and they are still struggling to figure out what pieces of this we can make happen, right? And that I think is incredibly grounding to remind yourself what a dollar really means to people and to recognize that just because the stock market's doing well doesn't mean that families are. And so it's been an incredible kind of dichotomy in a lot of ways, this duality for me of working in government for the last few years, managing things on a massive scale, and also working locally with families that are having trouble, putting two pennies together.
Yeah.
And certainly being that in my own right too. I'm both a doctor and a client. I take my own pets to the vet because it's important to have my own opinion double checked. And,
Sure.
and
yeah.
I know that I see sticker shock, right? And so
Yeah.
part of what drew me into government isn't just the fact that I can make a difference at a bigger and bigger level, because in the clinic, you're working with one family at a time. And when you work in government, you're helping hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of families at a time. But it also means that there's this greater separation. And so being able to have a hand in both worlds is really important. And I anticipate, even though our members of Congress are insanely busy, I do anticipate that if I'm fortunate enough to become the next congressperson for the 6th district, that I'll continue to use my professional skills to work in vaccine clinics and, volunteer in various ways to make sure that I'm continuing to give back in the ways that I can.
All right, so I cut you off before. So
It's okay.
give me like the 90-second how you end up from
goodness.
vet to
Okay.
2 minutes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's like
give me the quick version
condensed.
of like
So I was graduating vet school in like 2016, 2017
Yeah.
when Trump was first coming into power. And it was obviously a fairly terrifying time, invigorating time in a lot of ways. I remember the morning after he was elected, I was in the ER rotation at my vet school and somebody wrote America as dead on arrival on the ER board.
oh, God.
And so there's just these very like visceral moments that I have from that year. And I went to vet school knowing that I wanted to work in policy. I spent my summers in Guatemala and the Philippines working with wildlife that had been confiscated from the black market trade. So that was where I expected to spend my career, was working at this intersection of international conservation policy
Interesting. Okay.
and veterinary medicine.
So you've had a political kind of mind all
yeah,
along.
yeah,
It
yeah. I mean,
wasn't- yeah.
my favorite story of like how early my political mind existed is when I was 10 years old, was when the Bush v. Gore Supreme Court decision came down.
Yeah.
And I have this memory of sitting probably 3 inches from the television weeping, just watching this decision, understanding what this meant for our climate and our future.
Yeah.
And
You've been dialed in for a while.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
always a bit of a political animal, but no pun intended. But I really always
I think you should put that on a shirt, actually.
probably should. But within all of that, I really thought that I was always going to be in this role of scientific advising. And that's really what brought me into government. So basically, straight out of vet school, I did a rotating small animal internship, and I trained in emergency medicine and essentially used that to keep myself afloat as I started.
Rotating small
Yeah,
animal.
sorry.
I know
Let
what
me-
it
let me
means, but it's
define
such
that.
a funny turn of phrase. It's fine,
Yeah.
but
It basically means that I spent
struck
about
me
half
funny.
my time in the ER, and then I spent the other half of my time going through all the specialties. So
Okay.
spending time with neurology and radiology and exotics and all the different pieces. So I did that for a year,
Yeah.
high octane, right? Like 80-hour work weeks, making like $4 an hour. It was
Uh-huh.
never do the math on an internship or
Medical
residency. It
internship,
doesn't.
yep.
It's not in your favor. And then from there, I started applying for these postdoctoral fellowships, and I knew that I wanted to work in Congress because that is where policy is shaped. It's where it's set. And but it takes a little bit of time because there's only one slot a year to do that out of every veterinarian in the country. If you're applying through the fellowship program that I did, they take one person a year.
Wow.
So I applied the first year, made it through like one round, but didn't quite make it to the end. And then I applied again, and I applied through a broader program, got the executive branch fellowship at the State Department, spent 2 years there doing exactly the work that I'd trained in, counter wildlife trafficking work and conservation work. Both as a grant officer, I was managing $20 million a year in federal aid. And then I also did some work in international diplomacy and treaty negotiations and all these different pieces. A big focus also on pandemic preparedness because, of course, zoonotic disease, as we're seeing right now with hantavirus, right? COVID, all these pieces of zoonotic disease, I think it's 80% of emerging diseases come from wildlife. So a huge piece of professionals like me is helping prevent pandemic spillover. And so that was another big piece.
I'm exhausted just hearing this.
I was describing this to somebody the other day, and they went, "When do you sleep?"
Seriously.
And I said, about between midnight and 6 a.m.
Okay.
Approximately my sleep window. But yeah, so I did that for 2 years, and then I hadn't given up on my congressional, where I knew that my heart would lie.
Yeah.
And I was working at the State Department. Literally, I would be doing grant work and I'd be watching house floor footage in the corner, right? Because it is just something I'm so interested in. And they offered me a job at the State Department, and I said, how long before I could do a detail to Congress, go work as I knew that was something that sometimes happens. They said, well, about 5 years. And I said, cool, I'm going to apply for this fellowship. Yeah. And so I applied a third time for the Congressional Fellowship and got it.
Okay.
And so that's how I transitioned from State Department into Congress, because that's actually a very hard thing to do sometimes, to jump from one branch to another. And so I spent 1 year there as a fellow in the office of Congresswoman Betty McCollum. She's a member of the Appropriations Committee, which essentially means she manages the federal budget. Yeah. And she's been there for 25 years, incredibly experienced, really whip smart. And I got to work a lot on all things Department of Interior, EPA, clean air, clean water, protecting our natural resources, which, of course, we're watching this administration undo a lot of that work. And then from there, when my fellowship there was done, I got a full-time staff position in another congressional office for what I actually often refer to as kind of like the California version of this district, because it's the district just north of Los Angeles, just like we're just north of Boston.
Funny. Okay, yeah.
Coastal. So it has a lot of the same offshore wind considerations, a lot of the same, gas and oil pipeline considerations, ocean conservation, fisheries communities, and a lot of similar protected lands as well. Yeah. And so, there's a really beautiful piece of having worked in a district that, while, it was on the other side of the country, in many ways is mirrors a lot. Yeah, it's very analogous. And certainly having grown up in this area, I have all of that intrinsic knowledge from growing up here, and my family's still in the area. And then having worked in these various offices, it gives me a really kind of national view of what, families are struggling with and what they need, and also how to help protect our environment.
Having been there, so who was the Congresswoman you worked with, Betty? Yeah,
Betty McCollum, Minnesota 4, St. Paul, Minnesota. And then I worked for Congresswoman Julia Brownley, California 26.
So the Minnesota Congresswoman, you said, has been there for 25 years.
Yeah.
In your mind, having been there and worked with and around these people, what's the difference between a congressperson that has been a congressperson for 25 years and a career politician?
Yeah.
Because to me, they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right that it can be a slippery slope. And I do feel like I worked for career politicians in that way, right? And in many ways, it helped me understand why that can be, it's a double-edged sword. You need people that have institutional knowledge, that understand how the systems work. And at the same time,
I don't need somebody dying in office.
Right. People lose touch.
Yeah.
And, I'm actually very proud. Julia Brownley, my second boss on the Hill, she's retiring this year. And she's, making sure that her seat is getting filled by someone young and exciting. And the district is going through that primary process right now. Yeah. And I think that is responsible government, right?
Yeah.
That being said, I think, we're seeing that here in the Senate race, where I think we are all a little traumatized from the 2024 election.
Sure.
We watched Biden lose us the presidency.
Yeah.
And frankly, the people around him as well. And that was not a decision that we made. as the people. We should have had a rigorous primary process. And unfortunately, we didn't. And we ended up with Trump back in office.
Mm.
And I think that has a lot of ramifications in terms of the way that we view um, the folks who have been in office for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think we also, I can get very nerdy about this very quickly, but I think when I look at the Senate race, people ask me about it all the time. And it's really important that we don't just look at tenure and age, but we also look at policy. I am one of the rare people that votes more off of policy than off of, the other pieces of potentially what goes in. I think, unfortunately, studies show that most people, when they show up at the ballot box, aren't necessarily thinking like, what is this candidate stance on
Right.
the
Yeah.
economy, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes that is, but it's, it's not always the case. And so for me, I'm very focused on making sure that the people that I'm voting for are going to represent the interests that I believe in and are going to make the decision that I would make in that situation.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm always keeping in mind. That being said, in terms of career politicians, I think it's a huge piece of what makes me feel like it's so important to be in this race is because I am running against career politicians and they haven't worked an overnight shift where they go in at 5 p.m. and leave at noon the next day.
Yeah.
They haven't, realized that their paycheck's not going to cover their rent.
You may be too young for this, but it's George H.W. Bush in a grocery store, and the lady's scanning groceries, and he's like, "What's that?"
Right.
And they're like, "This is how you ring out groceries. You've never been in a grocery store before, and probably not."
Probably not. Yeah.
And you do get disconnected that quickly.
So when I was working as a staffer on the Hill, I wasn't covering the education portfolio. My colleague was. She was probably 10 years younger than me. And we would sit in these meetings at the end of the day with the congresswoman and the legislative staff. And we would talk about the various issues. And I remember we had a conversation around student loan policy. And my, probably 24-year-old colleague at the time doesn't have student loans. And so she was trying to answer these questions from the congresswoman and couldn't really answer them. And I had to be like, I'm so sorry. I need to interrupt.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of student debt.
Yeah.
And you're asking questions about how these systems work. Let me answer them through my lived experience.
Yeah.
Not because I'm covering this
I've
portfolio,
actually done it.
but because I've lived it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's that kind of lived experience. And that's what matters, I think, in government. And it's like, we use the term representation a lot. And I think that is important to make sure that your congresspeople are representative of the community that they're working for. But I also think having people with lived experience in office that aren't just listening to special interests, aren't going to have a lobbyist come into their office and take their word for it, but are actually going to know from their own experience and from the experience of their loved ones what the reality is on the ground, right? And that are willing to come into the community and really uplift the voices of the folks that have that lived experience in a way that they might not firsthand, but that they know how to elevate the people that do. Mm. That is, I think, the job of a representative in a way that a lot of folks, when they're in the House for 5, 10, 20, 25 years, can lose touch with.
Yeah.
And also, quite frankly, part of what has gutted me in smaller ways is seeing just the complacency and the privilege of a lot of the folks that have worked in the House for that long is, they feel entitled to it. And that is a very dangerous place for a representative or a senator to be. The moment that you feel entitled to power, it should never be given to you.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, a lot of what is fundamentally broken within our Congress and certainly within our executive branch. And I think our Supreme Court right now is we have a lot of people that have been elevated into power because they believe they deserve it rather than being true public servants.
All right, I think we've already hit a lot of this, but it's the third question, so I'll ask it anyway.
Ask it.
Between taking care of animals and running for Congress and all that, what are you doing to make Salem a better place?
Now, I knew that you were going to ask this question, and this is the one that all night has been sitting in my brain going, oh my God. Because I think the reality is I feel like I could rattle off 30 names of people that are doing extraordinary things right now to make
Mm.
Salem a better place. And, as a relatively newer resident, right, having been here a year, um, it is hard to feel like I'm making enough of an impact to warrant commenting on it.
Mm.
But the person that I am, the way that I jump into a community is with both feet. And so,
Mm.
my fiance is already part of our ward leadership with the town Democratic Committee, and I'm already helping doing community organizing when we were working on the Yes for Salem initiative. I wasn't just knocking doors for my campaign, I was knocking doors for Yes for Salem.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
my campaign team makes fun of me because I take time away from making calls for my campaign to make calls for local initiatives.
Yeah.
And so, and it's I think really important to be partnering whatever it is that you're doing in your life with ways that you can be giving back to not just folks that then are going to turn around and help you in some way. I think there's a lot of that in politics, kind of I scratch your back, you scratch mine.
Mhm.
And that is just not how I operate. It's I'm making an investment. And I also, quite frankly, end up in this position a lot as a candidate where I want to be all the places that I would be were I already elected, right?
Mm.
When there's events or community gatherings or things like that, that I feel like a representative should be at.
Yeah.
I want to be there, and I want to be there supporting people, whether that's through moments of joy or moments of grief. And so I do my best to prioritize those things, to be there for extraordinarily wonderful moments. And like we saw this week with Trooper Kevin Trainer, moments of immense community grief.
I was going to
And
curveball you a little bit and be
yeah,
like, if you weren't running for Congress, what were
yeah,
you doing to make? What would you be doing to make? What are you doing to make Salem a better place?
yeah,
But it sounds like the Congress thing is almost, well, it's all consuming. It's almost kind of secondary. You just want to be part of the
yeah.
town.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, is that
my
fair?
fiance and I say it all the time of like win or lose, right? Because I'm one of 6 candidates.
Oh, it's so many.
It's so many, right? And so while
I'm gonna have to interview all these people.
you're gonna have to interview all the people. You're gonna have to interview everybody. But one of the things we say, especially in moments of stress or anxiety around the campaign, is worst case scenario, we moved home.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
oh no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, there is this like really incredible piece of being locally involved and locally engaged where there's almost no better way to have made all of the friends that we've made as quickly as we've made them than by being a candidate for Congress, because
Sure.
you immediately are launched into all of the communities with people who are passionate public servants and care so deeply about the community.
Yeah.
If anything, in some ways, running for Congress has created this weird barrier with people that I otherwise might be much closer with by now, right? Like,
Hmm.
we may need to cut this out, but Mayor Pangala, for instance, incredible human being,
Yeah.
former theater kid, D&D nerd. These are all things I've heard secondhand about him.
Sure.
And I'm like, wait, but I'm a former theater kid, but I'm a D&D nerd.
Yeah.
Wait, I want to be his best friend.
Yeah.
But because he's the mayor, he's got to keep a respectful
Gotta
distance.
keep-
He
yeah,
can't-
yeah.
he's understandably being very professional.
Yeah.
And so there are also these pieces where I think, on the other side of this race, a whole other piece of Salem will unlock
Yeah.
for us socially, which will be pretty incredible. But also I'll have a lot more time to do the things that are strictly Salem, because I think right now, because of the way that this race unfolds, I have to be everywhere in a really big way.
Yeah.
I have to be trying to be not just here in Salem, but also nearby in Lynn, also up in Gloucester and Rockport and in Ipswich and in Newburyport and West Newbury and in Andover and in Tewksbury. And of course, can't forget the areas closest to where I grew up, Reading and Burlington and Bedford and Wakefield, where we
Yeah.
were just last night. So there is this piece of, in many ways, it's actually a little heartbreaking that I'm not able to spend 100% of my time in Salem right
Yeah.
now. But it is also, to a large degree, why we're so glad that this is our home, is because it is very easy. If there's something local happening, it's 5 minutes down the road.
Sure.
We can pop out and go.
Yeah.
It also makes it all the more heartbreaking when there is something that I wish I could be at and then I can't for one reason or another. But
Yeah.
for me, it's a lot of the things that that I contribute to in small little ways are we saw a coyote in our yard the other day,
Hmm.
and uh, I went online or I think actually my fiance mentioned it that there was another sighting, and it
And
was
you instantly
somebody.
diagnosed it with
Well,
mange.
yeah, right. No,
Yeah.
but somebody had like posted on Reddit that there was a coyote sighting near us. We were like, oh, it must be the same coyote. This, that, be the other thing. But then I immediately discovered that there's actually a tracking app that you can put in the
Oh,
details of like sightings
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and all your notes about it. And it just was this immediate feeling of, oh my God, what a cool tool, but also what a cool community that we're all basically just geo-tracking
Keep an eye,
the
yeah. Keeping
and
an
and
eye out.
obviously there's the folks that do it to protect their indoor outdoor cats or
Sure.
their dogs early in the morning. Um, yeah, careful of your pets at dusk.
Uh-huh.
But there's also those pieces of just having community that cares enough to be doing those pieces of community information gathering and you know the reality that no matter what it is that you're working on, whether it's something small and silly like that, or whether it is something enormous like making sure that we have funding for the new high school, um, every single person's contribution matters,
Mm.
whether you are running for Congress or whether you are taking a couple hours out of your workday to call some of your neighbors,
Yeah.
right? There are folks that I think are really unsung heroes here in Salem, and I'm getting the chance to meet a lot of them.
Yeah.
And yeah.
It's a very effective way to meet your neighbors, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think part of also coming in is that I'm to some degree sometimes I'm even introducing people that, are doing incredible
Sure.
work in these various areas, and I'm going to be in a position to help network them and bring
Yeah.
them together.
Yeah.
But I also think that any experience like that, any experience like running for Congress is such a learning curve. You are even folks that have been here for, their whole lives living in Salem or the North Shore in general. No matter who you are, this experience is drinking from the fire hose. You are going to learn stuff. And if you're not learning through this experience, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think that is also a really important piece of what I will take away from this, win or lose.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking to me.
Yeah.
Thanks for
My
helping out the
absolute
community,
pleasure.
for coming here. And I'm going to turn this off
Yeah.
because I have questions about my dogs.
Well, before you turn it off, what I'll say is thank you so much.
Yeah.
And if folks want to learn more, then go to mariahlancaster.com.
Do it. I'll put the link in the video description.
Yeah,
whatever.
we're knocking doors every
Dude,
day.
I'm so bad at the internet. Oh my God.
It's brutal.
The worst. The worst. All right, ready?
Ready.
I pretty much nailed it with that's Roscoe.
Oh my God, he's so cute.
So cute.